Hello, good morning. Oh my gosh, puppies, of course, trying to get to me. Uh, Good morning. Welcome to the old Hollywood stream of James Dean. Let me first get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way. If you're joining after the live stream. If you're watching this as a recording, just know, well, welcome. Please like and subscribe, and know that it originally aired as a live stream. So occasionally you may hear me interacting with people in the live chat. Um, okay. I think that's it. Well, hello, Natalie. Welcome. Good evening. Uh, welcome. Also, I have Lynn is always after me to put my tipping links in case you ever feel like donating and helping support these streams. It's pinned in the live chat. So I'm really excited to introduce you to James Dean. I learned so much about him doing this. I really thought, in comparison to some of the other old Hollywood live streams that I've done, that this would be a relatively shorter live stream, right? Because of him dying at 24. And it wasn't. Uh, in nowhere, in no way was it the shortest one. As a matter of fact, I made over 25 handwritten 25 pages of handwritten notes on him. Well, hi, Michaela. Welcome to James Dean. So, I actually wrote more handwritten pages of notes on him than Judy Garland, Elizabeth Taylor, Audrey Hepburn, despite the fact that he didn't have the multiple and numerous marriages, children. Well, good morning, Richard. Welcome. I hope your gig went well last night. Richard had a music gig last night. It was in the middle of the night for me, so I didn't get to watch it. I'm going to go back and watch the replay. And hello, Bronny. Hello. So, despite the fact of James Dean living a much shorter life than some of the other stars that I've highlighted in these old Hollywood streams, what a life he packed into those years. So let's get started, shall we? Oh, is Ronnie following you around, Natalie? James Byron Dean was born February 8th, 1931, in Marion, Indiana, to his mother, Mildred Marie Dean, and to his father, Winton Dean. His father was a dental assistant. He worked for the VA, which is the Veterans Administration here. Uh, oh, don't be sorry, Natalie. I'm happy that she's following you around because it brought her here. He was a dental assistant. He worked for the Veterans Administration, the VA, we call it here, and he was a Quaker stock, a Quaker farming stock. That's who his people were. And his mother was a very she was a very sensitive, artistic sort of person. Some people suggested that she may have had some Native American ancestry, some Indian blood, indigenous people blood in her. She kind of looks like it, I guess. I don't know. Listen, her and her husband certainly made a good-looking kid. That we know. But she was an artistic sort of person, and she reportedly gave her son the middle name Byron after her favorite poet. Little Jimmy, as he was called, was born at home in an apartment, but the family moved around a lot. And at one point, when James was about 2, Winton moved the family onto his sister's farm in the neighboring town of Fairmont, Indiana, and they lived in a small a little small cottage on the property there. And it seems that Winton had this grand scheme, right? He had this grand scheme that he was going to breed bullfrogs. Yes, bullfrogs. Nobody quite knows how he intended on making money doing this. And not surprisingly, it was unsuccessful, and the family returned to Marion. At 4 years old, little Jimmy came down with something called oopsie oopsie technology. Be my friend. He came down with something called fifth disease, fifth as in the number 5, also known as slapped cheek syndrome, which was a common viral illness back then that was often complicated by anemia. And he spent several days in the hospital, underwent a blood transfusion. It was 1936. So the cause of even though it was a common viral illness, the cause was unknown. And doctors were not able to reassure Jimmy's mother that the anemia would not return. Shortly after his release from the hospital, Winton came home and informed his wife that the government in California, the Veterans Administration in California, was looking for dental technicians. And it's been reported that there were a lot of marital tensions, and that Winton was in fact intending on going west on his own and leaving his wife and son behind in Marion. However, however, Winston's wife jumped at the chance to leave behind small-time farm community living and relocate to the shining lights of Santa Monica. Jimmy was a bright and energetic child who found it, well, most children do find it difficult to sit still, right? But he notoriously found it difficult to sit still. And it was pointed out constantly. He was always not so much into his scholastic or scholarly duties. He wanted to do more creative things or be out running around. And his mother encouraged his creativity. She even built a stage and characters out of cardboard. And they would often spend hours performing little plays together for family and neighbors. Mildred had really big dreams for Jimmy. And I don't know if those were dreams that she had for him in Marion, Indiana, or if once she got to the West Coast, California, got closer to LA, if that's when she had these really big dreams of Jimmy growing up and becoming a performer. And so she enrolled him in violin and tap dance lessons. And the two, Jimmy and his mother, were exceptionally close. Too close, according to Winton, who felt that Mildred was just simply spoiling their son, ruining him. And the fact that Jimmy and his mother did spend such an extraordinary amount of time together really left little time for him to kind of connect and make friends of his own. And that often made him the butt of jokes amongst his peers. But at age 9, Jimmy's life was going to change forever. When Mildred became very, very ill, she was experiencing severe abdominal pains. She was losing a great amount of weight and losing it very quickly. And tests revealed that she had an advanced terminal case of uterine cancer. Her mother-in-law, Winton's mother, arrived. She came from Indiana to help out and to help out with the family, to look after Mildred, to look after little Jimmy. But it was kind of too late for that. And 7 weeks later, Mildred was dead. 2 days before his wife died, Winton informed Jimmy that his mother would not be returning home. And Winton later recalled that Jimmy had just stood there staring and saying nothing. Winton said even as a child, he wasn't one to talk much about things close to him. He never liked to talk about his hurts. Some say Winton sold his car to pay for his wife's funeral, but others have pointed out that as he worked for the Veterans Administration, the funeral would have been free. Either way, he did not attend Mildred's funeral, leaving 9-year-old Jimmy and his paternal grandmother to escort Mildred's coffin back to Fairmont, Indiana for her burial. Each time the train stopped, Jimmy would jump out of the passenger car and run back to the baggage car to check on his mother's coffin and make sure that she was still there. He later said losing his mother was the greatest loss of his life, and a loss that he felt deeply for the entirety of his life, his short life. It was decided that Jimmy would remain in Fairmont and live with his aunt and uncle on their farm because Winton was either unable to care for him or unwilling to care for him. I kind of think the latter. But from that point on, Jimmy rarely saw or even spoke to his father. He later spoke of feeling abandoned and that his father was largely responsible for the pain he felt after his mother's death. While filming Rebel Without a Cause, he told co-star Natalie Wood that God had played a terrible, dirty trick on him with his mother and father, but that he had learned to channel that pain into his really emotional performances. He had an extremely stable and loving home with his aunt and uncle who raised him as one of their own. They were a kindly Quaker couple, and Jimmy grew up attending Quaker meetings and doing farm chores. Life on the farm was wholesome. It was carefree. He swam, fished, he skated, he played with farm machinery. In fact, that's where it said that he developed an early obsession with all things mechanical. He was precocious. He was a daredevil. At 10 years old, he lost all 4 of his front teeth, swinging on a rope in the family barn, trying to impersonate a trapeze artist. A schoolmate said he was always climbing trees and fences he wasn't supposed to climb, and was always finding new ways of getting in trouble. Once rigging an elevator to the side of the barn and almost breaking his neck when the rope snapped. At school, he was a solid average student, but he excelled at sports. And though he was often in trouble at school for pranks and high spirits and not paying attention, he had a charming and winning personality that got him out of most problems and won people over. When he was 13, his uncle bought him a whizzer. And 2 years later, he traded that in for a Sears End, which he raced at the local dirt track. When the war came, Winton joined the medical corps and remarried, simply showing up unannounced one day at the family farm with his new wife. And it appears that Jimmy was unimpressed and unfazed by this, by his father's arrival. He was far more interested in his bike and was often a regular at Marvin Carter's shop, where he would often show up out of breath exclaiming, "There's something wrong with my bike. Can you fix it right now?" While he waited, he would pester the mechanic with endless questions about whatever piece of machinery he was working on. Or he'd joke around with the other boys who hung around the shop. To the 2,000 inhabitants of Fairmont, really small town, Jimmy was a familiar sight, speeding through town on his bike. He sounded like a rocket, one shop owner said. You could hear him coming for miles. If he had only fallen once, things might have been different. This is what his uncle said. Trouble is, he never got hurt. He almost found nothing he wasn't good at the first time he tried it. At Fairmont High School, he played, he wasn't a big guy. He was really kind of thin, but he played baseball, basketball, ran track. He even set the county record in pole vaulting. All despite his very slight build. One coach stated that he was a clean-cut, all-American type boy and a good competitor, but he didn't much care for feedback, preferring to do things his own way. He joined the drama and debate clubs, and he played the clarinet, which would kind of start a lifelong love of music. And with his father over 2,000 miles away in California, James, he gravitated towards other father figures, including a local Methodist minister, Reverend James DeWeerd, a real-world pastor who had been injured in the war and was just as interested in fast cars and the arts as he was in religion. DeWeerd had a huge collection of films, home movies, if you will, of his world travels, and showed them to James and the other boys that seemed to gravitate towards the minister's home. And James was fascinated by DeWeerd, who he viewed as larger than life, and a well-traveled man. He especially loved the films of the bullfights in Mexico that DeWeerd had been to. DeWeerd encouraged James to read Shakespeare, and James even performed in some church plays and attended automobile races with DeWeerd, and the two became very close friends and remained in contact for the remainder of James' life. In 1949, James graduated from high school, and he was voted most likely to succeed by his classmates. And James had never forgotten his mother's dream for him, that he would grow up and become a performer. And so James said goodbye to the farm where he had spent the last 9 years of his life, and he headed west to California. He stayed with his father and his stepmother, but things were very, very strained in the household. Wynton had always wanted James to have a solid career, to put away these dreams, these lofty aspirations of becoming an actor. And so he really encouraged James to study pre-law. And James, he wasn't close to his father, but I think, like all children, he wanted to please his father. He wanted to be acknowledged by his father. So he tried to fulfill Wynton's wishes, and he enrolled at Santa Monica City College. But his heart just wasn't in it. He gravitated naturally towards drama and even went on to act in a student play. And within a year, James left Santa Monica City College and enrolled at UCLA to pursue drama. This caused, as you can well imagine, a lot of tension and angst in the Dean home. James later told a colleague that he never felt understood or seen by his father. At UCLA, James appeared as Malcolm in Macbeth and received extremely lackluster reviews for his performance. He still tried to appease his father by joining the ROTC Air Cadets. But family members have been quoted as saying that Wynton always gave the impression of being disappointed in his son. James moved into the Sigma Nu fraternity house, escaping tensions at home, but he was expelled after punching another fraternity brother. Despite all of this, as you can well imagine, James was extremely popular with the ladies. James' college roommate, screenwriter William Bast, who was also James' first biographer, wrote of James's romances with actresses Beverly Wills and fellow student Jeanette Lewis, and how James broke up with Wills after he exploded when another man asked her to dance at a function. Bass also spoke much later in life that he and James had spent a passionate night together at this hotel in Borrego Springs. Rumors of Dean's bisexuality were constant, and some claimed that his bisexuality was a well-known, well-kept secret. After a semester at UCLA, James dropped out, claiming that he wanted to be a real actor, and he just couldn't take all the tea-sipping academia. Through a frat house buddy, he had gotten himself an agent and an audition as an extra in a Pepsi Cola commercial. It paid cash. It put him in front of the camera for the first time, and it offered him the opportunity to return the next day for a bigger part, which he got. Now that he had his foot in the door, he landed a speaking role in an Easter TV special as the Apostle John in Hill Number 1. And though he only had a few lines, uh, in the role. It won him many a heart. In fact, students at an all-girl Catholic school started the first James Dean fan club. Hi, Mary Lou, welcome. In 1951, the very first James Dean fan club started, the Immaculate Heart James Dean Appreciation Society. During this time, he supported himself by working odd jobs, and one of those was as a parking attendant for CBS Studios. And that's where he met radio director Rogers Brackett, who he really took James under his wings, and he supported him financially and professionally. And there were rumors that the two were more than just friends. Through Brackett's connections, James, he got a few more unaccredited parts, which means he appeared in movies, but he was nowhere listed in the credits. One of those roles was in Fixed Bayonets. There he is. I'm going to remove that from the stage. We're going to add this to the stage. And he also starred in the Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis comedy, Sailor Beware. There he is. He also had a small part in the Rock Hudson comedy, Has Anybody Seen My Gal? But when no more roles came his way, though those came pretty quickly for him, James fell into a bit of a depression until his acting teacher, James Whitmore, encouraged James to head to New York and try out to see if he could attend the famous Actors Studio. Oh, we are going backwards. Okay, here we go. So, in October 1951, James bought a one-way ticket to New York City with big dreams, borrowed money, and a list of contacts from Rogers Brackett. He stayed at the Iroquois on West 44th, which was not as posh as it is today. He was really overwhelmed when he first arrived in the city, barely leaving his hotel. However, gradually he began to explore the city. He really liked visiting libraries and museums and art galleries. And when his money ran out, he got a job washing dishes and began going down the list of contacts that he had received from Rogers Brackett. He had also managed to get an agent in New York City, and that agent got him a role, a walk-on spot on a very popular CBS TV show, Mama. However, the director was, let's just say, unimpressed. And he felt that the director felt slighted by the fact that Dean behaved as if the work were well beneath him. Surly, uncooperative, difficult, opinionated were all words that were often used to describe James. Yet others found him incredibly charming and talented. And his new agent, even though he wasn't happy with him for getting fired from Mama, he secured a position as a stand-in for a really popular TV show called Beat the Clock, another CBS show. So I'm sure Rogers Brackett had his hand in that as well. So for $5 an hour, you can see James, up there in the upper right hand photo, there was a newspaper article written about stand-ins for mayhem. For $5 an hour, James was testing lighting, camera angles, and he would test the stunts that the contestants would have to try on the show. And while staying at the YMCA, he hung around a lot at a place called the Rehearsal Club, which was a residence for girls who came to New York to pursue acting and careers in show business. He dated some, and he read through lines with others. And one night he met a dancer named Liz Sheridan, and the two quickly fell into a whirlwind romance. They spent every single moment that they could together. In fact, they spent, she wrote about their romance in her book that she wrote called Dizzy and Jimmy. Spending so much time together, they eventually rented a room together at the Hargrave, which had at one time been a really fabulous hotel that had fallen into some disrepair, shall we say. Sheridan said that the size of their room was a broom closet with peeling wallpaper, but they hung up some of Jimmy's artwork and called it a home. She also describes James as funny, sweet, kind, and deeply, deeply romantic. A week after his 21st birthday, he got an audition for The Web, a live CBS show. And the moment he began reading his lines, the director is quoted as saying, "I knew that boy had something special." Though he had good reviews, really good reviews, he was eventually fired again for being moody and unresponsive during rehearsals. Though living quite a happy, poor existence with Dizzy, things took a different turn when Rogers Brackett moved to New York and began taking Dean to the ballet and expensive dinners, and James eventually moved in with him. Dizzy explains it away by saying, look, he was simply doing what he had to do with Brackett to get jobs. And it seemed to pay off. He landed a couple of roles, including one on a popular TV anthology, playing a friend of Abe Lincoln's, who was one of his heroes, and as Wally Wilkins in the play See the Jaguar. While the play was a flop, I mean, it was a disaster from night one, James was singled out for his performance. In fact, he had a write-up that singled him out in the New York Herald Tribune. He finally felt ready to audition for the Actors Studio, which was being run by Lee Strasberg. You might be familiar with that name because he was a great mentor of Marilyn Monroe's, who also attended the Actors Studio at this time. For months, James worked on one scene with Christine White to perform as their audition for Lee Strasberg for the Actors Studio. And they were both accepted, along with Marilyn Monroe, there she is, and a young Paul Newman, there he is, and others. Strasberg could be particularly brutal with his criticisms, and James was one of the youngest students ever accepted. He was singled out often by Strasberg. Strasberg did not appreciate James' impromptu performances. He was not a fan at all, and he did not have a problem calling James out on it. In fact, at one point, Strasberg told him that he told James, you have performed an exercise, not a scene. To which James walked out and vowed never, ever to return. And though he did return, Strasberg remained unimpressed. James's impromptu style and refusal to hit marks just went against everything Strasberg believed in and demanded, while those traits often frustrated directors. They also gave James's performance a very distinctive honesty that resonated with audiences. And while James continued to study and work on his craft, he continued to take jobs and appeared in several anthologies, which were very big on TV. TV was a big thing back then. And he took these jobs in these anthologies and these dramatic series. And he even appeared alongside Ronald Reagan in one. There he is. There he is with Ronnie. December 1954. Boy, a lot of things are going to happen in the next 10 months for James between December 1954 and September 1955. He was now dating actress Barbara Glenn, and their relationship was described as extremely volatile. It was just a nonstop roller coaster of breakup and makeup. His bisexuality was an open secret amongst friends, and while he was discreet, those close to him knew he did not limit himself to one gender. This fluid approach, that's a nice way of saying it, especially for the 50s, this fluid approach to relationships was incredibly daring in the 1950s, but was on par with his dedication to live life on his own terms. And in February 1954, James made his second appearance on Broadway in André Gide's The Immortalist, playing a gay houseboy, which was extremely controversial for the time. The play was a success, much different than his first run on Broadway. He even won the Daniel Blue Theater World Award for the most promising newcomer of 1953 to 1954. But more importantly, The Immortalist caught the eye of Elia Kazan, who was scouting. He's a director, and he was scouting for the lead of his upcoming film, East of Eden. By sheer fortune, not planned at all, the author of East of Eden, John Steinbeck, was also present the same night for the play and immediately stated that Dean would be perfect for the part. Kazan arranged for James to have a screen test. Kazan felt really drawn to Dean. Here you can see Elia Kazan with Marlon Brando. And Kazan felt that Marlon Brando and James Dean were extremely alike in temperaments, in their grit, and Kazan was completely on board with seeing if Dean would be a good fit. So he arranged a screen test for James for East of Eden. It wasn't so much of a scene as more of just James doing impromptu acting with the actress, which is right up. That's Dean's style, right? So how could he go wrong? And he didn't. Steinbeck watched the screen test and proclaimed that this quirky young actor was in fact Cal Trask in the flesh, the troubled protagonist of his story. And so Kazan cast the 23-year-old, virtually unknown actor in the lead for a major Hollywood production. And in the spring of 1954, James said goodbye to New York and his friends for Hollywood, telling his friends to pay attention, that something big was coming. He was not wrong, my friends. He was not wrong. James returned to Hollywood a very different person than the insecure young man that he had been 2 years before. He now bristled, if you will, with creative energy and passion. And he was ready to pour this into his roles. And that's exactly what he did. Under Kazan's direction, James gave a powerful performance as the moody and misunderstood son, vying for his father's love. Does this sound familiar? For his father's love and attention in a dysfunctional family. On set, James could be very mercurial. He would even fight with crew. But Kazan gave him freedom as a young actor that was really rare in Hollywood. Many of Dean's scenes were brilliant improvisations, caught magically on film thanks to the way Kazan directed this young star. And while filming East of Eden, James wandered onto an adjoining film set and met young actress Pierre Angeli, who was filming The Silver Chalice with Paul Newman, and the two fell madly in love. James affectionately nicknamed her Annarella for little Anna, and they enjoyed a somewhat carefree and magical romance, spending time together riding his motorcycle and strolling along Santa Monica Beach. Angeli recalled later, we were like Romeo and Juliet, together and inseparable. But like Romeo and Juliet, external forces pulled them apart. Angeli's mother was a devout Catholic. She did not approve of Dean whatsoever. She felt he was undisciplined, too different, and most importantly, not Catholic. After a 6-month whirlwind romance, Angeli tearfully broke it off with Dean one night in his Hollywood bungalow. And within weeks, she married the man that her mother had chosen for her, Vic Damone, who was a very successful singer and safe choice, and most importantly, approved by Pierre's mother. James was heartbroken. Legend has it, though he denied this later, but numerous sources have said that on Pierre's wedding day, he rode his motorcycle to the Beverly Hills church where the wedding was taking place and watched from across the street, dressed in his trademark red jacket and jeans. And as the newlyweds emerged, he revved his engine as hard as he could before speeding off into the distance. Years later, Angeli admitted that she had never gotten over Dean, writing in a letter shortly before her death, "My real love died behind the wheel of a Porsche." After 2 failed marriages and severe bouts of depression, Pier Angeli died of a barbiturate overdose at the age of 39. In March 1955, East of Eden premiered with Dean's old actor studio colleague Marilyn Monroe attending opening night. Critics and audiences alike were astounded by his performance. The New York Times compared Dean to Marlon Brando. People were mesmerized by the young actor. After breaking up with Pier Angeli, James, he suffered no lack of attention from the ladies or dates, and the gossip columns were paying attention. The woman most often on his arms was Swiss actress Ursula Andress, whom James had been introduced by his agent. She, funnily enough, she had claimed for years to be the female embodiment of Marlon Brando, long before her infamous role in James Bond's Dr. No. She was stunning. Okay, let's go on to our next set. I hope you are all enjoying this. However, despite Ursula and all the other women in his life, when Dean wrote to his old girlfriend, his old girlfriend, Barbara Glenn, to inform her that he had fallen in love, it was not with Ursula or any of the other ladies. It was with his Palomino, Cisco the Kid. Love that. His next film role would cement him as a Hollywood legend, playing Jim Stark in Warner Brothers' Rebel Without a Cause. Wearing his iconic red jacket, white t-shirt, and jeans, James became the archetype for teenage angst and rebellion. Off-screen, he bonded with his co-stars Natalie Wood and Sal Mineo, and Rebel Without a Cause, well, it's a story, no spoiler alert, this is just the texture of the film, is a story of teenagers alienated from their parents and society, trapped in anguished youth. You know how teenagers can be. I'm sure I wasn't near that dramatic. Desperately searching for meaning in a world that doesn't understand them. And Dean's performance was the soul of this film. A perfect combination of his gritty, manly toughness and this kind of soul bearing and aching vulnerability. On set, Dean would often disappear on his motorcycle to clear his head. He occasionally clashed with crew members. He stayed out late at jazz clubs and could be difficult during filming. But director Nicholas Ray was really indulgent with him and allowed Dean to channel his natural restlessness. onto the screen and pour that into the role. His on-screen romance with Natalie Wood was so tender that people speculated that the two must be involved romantically off screen. And while 17-year-old, yes, she was only 17, admitted to having a large crush on Dean, James considered her too young. And so he took on a more brotherly mentoring role to the actress, who allegedly went on to have an affair with the film's director, much, much older Nicholas Ray, and a more age-appropriate Dennis Hopper. Look how young Dennis Hopper was there. Wow. When the film was released in October 1955, it was instantly hailed as the defining film of its era. But by then, you know, James Dean was already dead and frozen in time at the age of 24 to become forever the embodiment of teenage angst. In May of 1955, after wrapping Rebel Without a Cause, an exhausted Dean immediately went to work on what would be his final film, Giant. Cast aside Elizabeth Taylor and Rock Hudson, he played Jet Rink, a surly, brooding ranch hand who strikes oil and ages into an extremely bitter tycoon. The role required him to really stretch artistically and play a character far older than his years. And the director, George Stevens, he was a no-nonsense film veteran. He did not appreciate the improvisation of Dean. He didn't appreciate Dean's long breaks and disappearances from set. Those, in fact, infuriated everybody on the crew. Rock Hudson was said to have found James to be very odd, is how Rock put it. A loner, very, very odd loner. Rock was not really a fan, but Liz Taylor, on the other hand, absolutely adored him and treated him like a kid brother, even though Dean was actually a year older. Excuse me, ma'am. That's okay. Every time. Every time. Oh, okay. Despite all of this friction on set, James delivered moments of sheer brilliance. In this scene, where he plays character Jetwing, the older character Jetwing, who is drunkenly celebrating alone in a banquet hall, Dean insisted on actually getting drunk in order to give the scene authenticity. The director was both exasperated and impressed at the scene, and it became one of the film's most riveting moments. By the time Giant wrapped filming in early September 1955, James Dean had unknowingly completed the 3 films that would define the entirety of his career. He was exhausted after completing 3 back-to-back projects in under a year. But Warner Brothers was already planning new projects for its rising star. Sadly, we know that that was not to be. There was so much more to James than the 3 films he's famous for. He had begun writing. He had ideas about directing. He was busy with his art. Jemima Josephine. No, thank you, ma'am. Always the peanut gallery. Always. He had his art. He had his music. And there was always this passion for cars. A passion that we know would result in cutting his young life short. Now flush with a little bit of money, Dean indulged in his love of cars and motorcycles, purchasing a Triumph motorcycle and a red MGTD sports car. Not long after, he bought a white Porsche 356 Speedster and began entering local sports car races under the pseudonym Jim Dean. He was a skillful race car driver. He really was. And achieved second in his class in his very, very first ever race in March 1955. And over the next few months, he entered several races, even winning first place in Santa Barbara in May 1955. He described racing as the one thing in life that truly made him feel free. When I'm racing, he said, I forget everything else. Warner Brothers did not share his enthusiasm for this dangerous sport. Look, he was money to the studios, right? And they forbade him from racing. They forbade him from getting into the driver's seat of a sports car during the filming of Giant. And James very reluctantly agreed and sat out racing through the summer of 1955. But the very day that filming wrapped on Giant, he jumped right back into the driver's seat, literally, trading in his Porsche Speedster for an even more powerful Porsche 550 Spider, only one of 90 ever made. He had the number 130 painted on it. Not sure what the significance of that was, but he had it painted very large on there. He picked it himself. And he also had his nickname, Little Bastard, painted on the back. It was a nickname given to him because of his mischievous, rebellious streak. In late September 1955, he was preparing for a race in Salina, California, and with his mechanic, Rolf Woodrick, he jumped into this Porsche Spider and headed north to break his new car in. Just so ironic, just 13 days earlier, he had filmed a public service announcement warning young people about speeding on highways, ending it by saying, take it easy. The life you save might be mine. As Dean and Woodrick were heading north towards Salinas, the Porsche was pulled over by a highway patrolman, and Dean was given a ticket for doing 65 in a 55-mile-an-hour zone. You can see the ticket right there. And you can also see, if you look carefully, that the ticket was later dismissed because of James being deceased. Around 5:45 p.m., a Ford Tudor coupe approaching from the opposite direction and driven by 23-year-old Donald Turnipseed attempted to make a left-hand turn, crossing right into Dean's path, giving him no time to react. The lightweight Spider slammed head-on into the Ford. The Porsche was crumpled into a heap of metal. The impact threw Woodrick from the passenger side of the vehicle. Sports cars, race cars only had, I don't know if this has changed, only had one seatbelt in the car, and that was for the driver. And when a friend of his asked James, why is there only one seatbelt? James had told him, because there's only one driver. So Woodrick was expelled from the vehicle. He was badly injured when he hit the ground. Dean was wearing the car's only seatbelt, and so he was still strapped in. He suffered a broken neck and massive internal injuries. He needed to be extracted from the wreckage and was pronounced dead on arrival at Paso Robles War Memorial Hospital. He was 24 years old. The world was in shock. Not since the sudden passing of Rudolph Valentino in the 1920s had a young screen idol been cut down in the height of his promise. Fans wept openly in the streets. Young girls held candlelight vigils, and Warner Brothers debated on how to handle the upcoming release of Rebel Without a Cause, which had not been released yet. His funeral was held in Fairmont, Indiana, where it had all begun. 3,000 people swarmed the small town and the cemetery where he was laid to rest next to his mother. In the aftermath, the coroner's office deemed his death an accident, placing no blame on either James or Donald Turnipseed, who simply hadn't seen the Porsche in the low sun and who survived the crash with minor injuries. While his brutal death was the end of his life, it marked the beginning of his legend. Just weeks after his death, Rebel Without a Cause was released in theaters, and crowds flocked to see him in it. Warner Brothers was inundated with fan mail, and fan clubs sprang up around the world. There were even rumors that he wasn't dead at all, but rather had gone into hiding as a result of being badly disfigured. Teens around the world tore his pictures out of magazines to adorn their walls, and he quickly became a cult figure, especially in a time where the ethos was live fast and die young, which thrilled the younger generation but terrified the older ones. He was nominated for an Academy Award posthumously for East of Eden, but lost out to Ernest Borgnine. And he was also the first actor ever to receive a nomination posthumously. He was nominated again the following year, but lost out to Yul Brynner. When Giant was released in 1956, it gave audiences a final chance to see him in something new. And watching him transform on screen from a young, lanky ranch hand to a bitter, grizzled old man was a painful reminder of the years that he himself would never get to live. Critics praised him. Andy Warhol did silk screen of him. Rock bands wrote records about him. And many predicted that had he lived, he may have well become one of the greatest actors his time. Rest in peace, James. That is it, my friends. The short but brilliant life of James Dean. If you have any questions, I can try to answer them. I hope that you learned as much about him as I did. There was so much more to him than I realized when I started doing this research. And I'm just in awe of everything he went through and what he packed into his short life. Thank you all for coming. And I will tell you that the poll had gone up in the group to see who you would like me to do the next Old Hollywood on. And it was close for a while at first, but we do have a winner. The tribe has spoken, and the next Old Hollywood will be on Grace Kelly. So I'm really excited about that, as it gives me an opportunity to wear my tiara again. So thank you all for coming. It was a sad story, but he sure packed a lot of life. He sure packed a lot of life into those 24 years. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, your evening, your weekend, and I will see you all again on a stream very, very soon. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.